everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the Deep Dive Pop Culture Podcast from Nerdist. I'm Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. Folks, I'm sure you've seen in the news or on social media, but we lost one of our great filmmakers recently, which is David Lynch, who passed away at the age of 78, I want to say. Who was, who meant a lot to a lot of people. Go back and listen to my episode with Maggie Mae Fish from like March, I think, of 2024, where we kind of did a deep dive into all of his movies and just kind of how weird and cool he was as a dude. And so I wanted to talk about him, but obviously we already did that big thing about his movies, but we didn't really get all that into Twin Peaks, of which there were, two seasons on ABC, then a film, and then the return on Showtime just a few years ago, which sadly is the last major work that he directed. There was always talk that he was going to do something. We'll get into like the conspiracy theories about what he was going to maybe be doing next and things like that. But joining me today to talk about this is a colleague of mine for way back. We have worked together. We did work together at Nerdist for a long time. And she went on to greater and more enjoyable things. I don't know. But please join me. First time to the show, writer, critic, and a friend of mine, Lindsey Romain. Hey, Linz, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, so like one of the big things that you and I talked about, especially during the pandemic, the pandemic was a big kind of time for me. I'll just say to like really, that was when I really devoted time to watching Twin Peaks, finishing the original season, finally watching Fire Walk with Me, and then getting into the return. But we talked a lot about that during that time because it was blowing my mind constantly.
Yes.
But when did you first watch Twin Peaks? When did you first get into David Lynch in general?
Yeah, I have kind of a sort of a jagged like watching experience of Twin Peaks. I didn't do it all at once. And my David Lynch kind of experience is a roundabout thing too. So my first David Lynch encounter was with Mulholland Drive when that came out, because I think I was like, I think I was probably like 13 or something when it actually came out. But I watched it on video. A relative of mine had rented it, and I didn't know what it was, and I watched it, and I was very intrigued. But obviously, my young brain did not comprehend it at all. But I remember like images and stuff from it, so it really stuck with me. And then when I went to film school in Chicago for college, and eventually changed to journalism. But when I was a film major, David Lynch was frequently coming up and Twin Peaks was frequently coming up. And so I decided to check it out. And this was back when Netflix was still disc only. So I watched the first season on Netflix discs. And I had I think there were multiple tiers of Netflix where you could some of them you could have 2 discs at a time or whatever. Yeah. But I had the cheapest one. So I would watch a disc which had 2 or 3 episodes and then mail it in and have to wait a couple weeks or whatever for the next one to come in, or maybe a few days. But so I watched it that way, the first season. And then I only watched the first season then because, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was in college, things come up. And then we watched Inland Empire when I was in film school too, which is a very interesting one to, that was the first movie I really watched, with full comprehension of David Lynch and his mythos and stuff. And so watched that, and then years later when Netflix was streaming, had streaming service and Twin Peaks was on there, finished the series, loved it. And then I watched Fire Walk with Me probably years later, and then I watched The Return when it was airing live, so week to week. So yeah, and then I've done multiple rewatches through the years. Usually I do kind of the first season and a half when I do a rewatch, but this recently I did a full first 2 seasons, Fire Walk with Me and The Return, all back to back. So yeah, I feel uniquely kind of prepped for this
which
episode.
We did. I just sort of out of the blue was like, hey, do you want to come on the podcast? And one of the ideas was Twin Peaks because I wanted to talk about it, and you were like, I'm on, let's do it. Yeah. I just finished it.
Yeah, and I started it before David Lynch passed, so it was kind of a weird coincidence. And I finished the last couple episodes right around when he passed away. So yeah, it was kind of an eerie experience for
Yeah, and
sure.
especially watching The Return. I mean, because he's a main, a supporting character in the original series, and obviously
Yeah.
a tinier role in Fire Walk with Me. But he's effectively like one of the main leads of The Return,
Yeah.
um, which is on the one hand, it's like, it's weird that he put himself in and he directed all these episodes and everything like that. But it's nice to kind of be like, we have this. Not only is it his last major director work, but it's also like a lot of him just
Yeah.
on screen and talking about stuff. And I saw a lot of people after he passed away sharing either the scene or just the image of him when he's talking to David Duchovny, and he's
Hmm.
like, I told everybody, fix your hearts or die. And it's like,
Right.
that is a very David Lynchy sentiment. Of course he would deliver it himself, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
um
It did kind of feel like his appearances felt also like him immortalizing himself a little bit,
I think
like,
so.
like kind of inserting a lot of David Lynch isms so that, because I feel like there's a sense when you watch The Return that he kind of knows it's maybe the last thing he'll ever make
Yeah.
just because of his struggles with getting stuff made. So it feels like he's really going all in and, yeah, kind of making himself say stuff.
And there's obviously, like, didn't know at the time, but just in the the ensuing years, like, so many people in the cast had passed away, like,
Yes.
um, just tons of them actually, like,
Yeah. It
um,
was eerie. That was another eerie part of rewatching it and being like, "Oh, he's dead. She's dead."
yeah,
Yeah, really, really strange. And it's not that old. I think it's like
no,
7 years old now.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah, it's not even, yeah, it's not that old at all, but
yeah,
it feels really, it the tone of the show is very, like, focused on, like, death, or it feels kind of
yeah,
like you're maybe fighting against death a lot. And
yeah.
so, in retrospect, you could read a lot of that into it, but yeah. um
I had kind of forgotten too when I rewatched it that like Peggy Lipton had passed even, and
right,
so when she showed up, I just had forgotten that, and just like an extra pang in the heart.
yeah, yeah. And then, like, Robert Forster, who's only in The Return,
Yeah,
had passed away like right after that came out and everything like that.
Harry Dean Stanton too. I
Right.
think that was one of his last things, and
Yeah.
he's only in Fire Walk with Me, I believe. So
Yeah.
no, yeah, also, yeah,
Yeah. So I do want to devote a huge amount of time to Firewalk with Me, because I think that is still, to this day, as an adult, maybe the most disturbed I've been by a movie. And not
absolutely,
even just the uh, uh, Laura Palmer stuff, which is obviously harrowing, but like all the other weird stuff, like, just really got to me. Um,
yeah. Yeah, I
um,
rewatched that one a couple days ago because I think I did my rewatch, but I did actually skip Fire Walk with Me when I jumped into The Return, kind of on accident because I was timing it to stuff. So I went
mhm.
back and rewatched that one, and yeah, similarly, I mean that's probably my favorite David Lynch movie just in general. Um, and yeah, rewatching it though, I was kind of overwhelmed with how existentially dreadful it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just the whole feeling of watching it is really intense.
Yeah, the movie and The Return feel very like you're watching like a Doom. Like, there's
Yeah,
just like a layer of that, um, the world falling apart and everything.
yeah,
And I know people have done like huge video essays and about what it actually means, and I think a lot of it is not real. But
no. That was
um,
one of the frustrating parts about watching The Return live was that it was a lot of between episodes like theorizing and stuff, which like there is definitely some messaging and stuff. I know that was a lot more Mark Frost kind of
yeah,
putting like mythology and stuff into it. So some of it like is kind of relevant, but I don't know, it's kind of antithetical to David Lynch to try to like figure out the meaning of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, it is, there's so much there. I think that's the all of his movies for the most part, or all of his major works, I should say. Like, there's a lot that you can read into what's going on behind the curtain or under the surface, or
right.
whatever metaphor I want to use.
Right.
Um,
I think there's definitely like it's not useless to kind of theorize, I suppose, but I think it was just some of the tone of the theorizing was like very like here's what he meant with this very like subtle thing that was probably really just because he thought it like looked cool. Like some of it's
yeah,
pretty fairly not necessarily like Easter eggy.
that is the pitfall you run into with Twin Peaks, is that you get a lot of people theorizing about stuff within the series, and then you get a lot of people theorizing that it's all just like a metaphor for something in the real world that David Lynch is
Right.
talking about. And it's like, I guess you can read into that, but it's like to boil down an entire, kind of cultural touchstone that spanned 30 years to he was making a critique about, TV dinners or whatever. And it's like, I don't understand why this is where you went. I watched that big 4-hour video of a guy diatribing. And you make compelling arguments, but it's also just like, I think you're reading too much into a lot of this stuff. And it's also, how dare you say there's one answer to this thing? Like,
right. And especially just knowing Lynch is like an artist, that a lot of his story stuff comes straight from his meditation. Like it's just ideas that came to him. Like I think a lot of stuff threads together, and there's obviously themes that pop up throughout all of his work that unite kind of his larger filmography. But yeah, I do think he works a little more impressionistically than the YouTubers sometimes want to admit.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge, like, watching Twin Peaks and needing concrete answers, I think that's a fool's errand.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines from anything is from A Serious Man, the Coen Brothers movie, where the guy just says, "Accept mystery."
Yeah.
It's like, just do it.
That's A Serious Man would be a good double feature with like a Lynch movie, because they are kind of operating in that same headspace.
Yeah. It's kind of surreal banality, I think, is kind of what that movie is, but certainly a lot of Lynch stuff.
Right.
So let's dive into the original, series, the first season of which I remember. So we came out in 1990. I was a child, 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And
I was 2, so
well, good. You can always hold over my head that you're a child, you're a youngin'.
Yeah.
And I'm whatever. But I remember the phenomenon of it. I didn't watch it, but like I remember all of the promos for it. They made, which there were many, and it was a cultural moment. Like Kyle MacLachlan was on Saturday Night Live, like just a bunch of stuff happening because that show was so popular. And I remember, I forget if I said that, who cares where I said this, but the moment that sticks out of my head from those is that they used in a lot of the promos for the pilot is Jack Nance on the phone going, "She's dead, wrapped in plastic."
Great impression, by the way.
Thank you so much. I have had 40 years to work on it. But then just kind of not really understanding what the show actually was, like knowing that it was weird. Like they did a parody of it on Sesame Street. Yeah. So it's like, okay, this is weird, but I don't understand. I don't have a grasp of what actually it means.
Right.
And then obviously later on getting into shows that kind of, whether I realized it or not, were inspired by Twin Peaks. Lost, I think, is something that wouldn't have happened if Twin Peaks wasn't there. Even parts of like X-Files, even though that's much more procedural, but like, and then finally getting around to watching. I when I initially watched it, I watched the first season and then didn't watch the second season. And then I don't know, like, I think when I was watching it during the pandemic, I was like, I did finally watch the second season, but I was just sort of like, some of that stuff. Like, I think some of it is okay. I think some of it works. And then some of it is like, imagine trying to do a David Lynch thing without David Lynch involved, I think is a nutcasey thing to do.
Yeah. And you can really tell it feels like David Lynch fan fiction in certain parts. Yeah. No, but you're right. You're right with actually Lost is a good reference point, because that was my first big like show I was really obsessed with. It came out when I was like a teenager, and I was on all the message boards and stuff, and Twin Peaks came up a lot from like not just the people on the message boards, but the creators. I think Damon Lindelof cited it pretty frequently, and so that was my awareness of it. I knew what Twin Peaks like was, generally speaking, just as like a child of the internet and pop culture, but I also, like you, did not know. And I actually, a lot of my understanding of it came from visual stuff I saw on like Tumblr, like Black Lodge screenshots, and even like fashion and stuff inspired by Twin Peaks. Like I knew it more from like the aesthetics than the story. which is an interesting way to head into it, because I think when you only have those pieces, you might expect something very different than what it turns out being. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember, and like some of it just became part of pop culture in a weird way, like the Black Lodge, like just the look of it, all the red curtains and everything like that.
Yeah.
People talking in reverse.
Yeah.
That gum you like is coming back in style. Yeah, and just the log lady, like just a lot of that stuff just
Yeah.
started popping up places. And yeah, Damon
Yeah.
Lindelof clearly was a big, I think The Leftovers is an even better like example of that.
Yes.
Feels much more Lynchy, because I think
Totally.
Lost kind of also has the J.J. Abrams-ness to it, whereas
Yeah.
The Leftovers is just it's a bleak nightmare.
Right. I think yeah, I always say about The Leftovers that it feels like Lindelof kind of almost correcting Lost in a way. Like it just
I
feels
think
like
so.
him, like that's what he was really the point he was trying to get at. And similarly, not to like spoil anything with The Leftovers, but kind of, but it's, I mean, it's in the beginning. Like the lack of answers is kind of the point of the
Yeah.
whole show, which is really like what David Lynch wanted to do with Twin Peaks too, until he was sort of forced by ABC to answer the Laura Palmer mystery. But yeah, it feels like Lynch kind of almost following on that thread too.
Yeah. You can see it because we were on a video call, but just outside my window is ABC Studios, and that is
Oh,
where,
nice.
or ABC, not studios, but the
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, offices.
Mm-hmm.
But I always think about that, like who was the executive who forced David Lynch to do it? It was Bob Iger, who's now in
I
charge of
know.
Disney. It's a
I
wild
know.
thing. On the one
Learning
hand,
that was kind of,
he did give the show a chance, which nobody else is
yeah,
going to. But
that's kind of the up and down with Bob Iger, right?
yeah,
There's some good stuff mixed in there, and then some real like,
yeah.
why?
But I will say, like, you look at, I think the first season is like something close to a masterpiece. It's
Yes,
shorter. I think it's, what is it, like 13, 14 episodes, something like that, maybe more than
something like that. Yeah,
that. Most of it hangs together really, really well. Lynch directed a fair amount of it. He was on set a lot because his character of Gordon Cole is involved quite a bit. And just, you get a lot of really scary stuff, which I don't think there was a show, still, even to this day, that is that weird and silly at times, and then that incredibly terrifying at other times.
yeah,
It threads that needle. It's the only show I think that really threads the needle, because like so much of, like, Andy and what's her name? I can't remember.
Lucy.
Lucy. They're so silly, and you're just like,
Yeah,
okay, and when I think it's in the second or third episode when Cooper takes them all out to the woods and he's like throwing rocks, and that's like, it's such an
yeah,
odd way to like figure out
right.
metaphysical way to to figure out clues. And then there's also Bob like attacking Laura in Grace Zabriskie. I can't remember the character name.
Sarah
Sarah
Palmer.
Palmer. God, too many Palmers. I'm
I know.
so bad with character names. I think
No,
people who
it's
listen to
okay.
this will know I cannot remember character names to save my life.
It's also just a giant cast.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
I sometimes just freeze up on names too, because it's a lot of people, and especially when you get into the like Bobs and the
Yeah,
Mikes and whatever, you're
Mike.
kind of like, wait, who was that? Yeah,
It's so weird to think that in Europe it was released as a finished film. Like they
yeah.
found Bob and ended the problem, and it was just like, that is.
Have you ever watched
I
that
have. I don't
pilot?
like it.
Yeah, no, me neither. It's actually really like just upsetting once you've seen the whole thing to be like,
Yeah.
damn, if it had ended this way. And like it realistically could have, like that's how Mulholland Drive came to be, was it was a pilot that had to be
Yeah.
spliced together to make a film, and that worked out obviously, but
Yeah, because he was able to
yeah.
make it. But it's the opposite. Like, he went
Yeah,
extra
yeah.
weird with it, whereas that was like, let's just finish it and make it
Right.
less interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of Bob in that version too, which
Tons,
is
yeah.
interesting because he's very limited use in the actual first season.
Mm-hmm. You just see him I mean, like, he became like the iconic focal point of, certainly Fire Walk with Me, but he's in it a lot in season 2 as well.
Yeah. I had forgotten, like, I know probably Twin Peaks people who've watched it a million times will laugh at me for this, but I forgot that he's literally in the first episode of, like, he's in the mirror at the end of the first episode when Sarah kind of sees him, which is freaked me out a lot more because I
Sure.
had forgotten that when I rewatched it. For some reason in my memory, he came in a little bit later. So, yeah, I don't know. Bob, what a
Yeah.
weirdo.
What a weirdo.
What a weird guy.
Weird guy from another dimension
Yeah,
who
who's like the
infests people and whatever.
embodiment of evil, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Named Bob.
Bob. Yeah.
Um, season 2 starts out really strong. I do think that the actual episode that Lynch himself directed that reveals the killer and is one of his most terrifying episodes ever
Yes.
directed. It's
Yes.
really upsetting. Ray Wise gives a great performance there, and he gives a great performance doing effectively the same thing in Fire Walk with Me.
He's incredible. Rewatching
Yeah.
it this time, I was like, that's almost like the MVP of the series. Like, it all works because of him. Like, I think if that had been the wrong casting, I don't know, it would have been a tougher sell for some of that stuff.
Well, especially because there's so much, I mean, throughout the whole series, like that's the other thing. I don't think there's a badly cast person in the entire show.
No, that's a
Everyone
good point.
is exactly as weird as they need to be and can hit the intense, like extra weird. Like I always think of I'm here, can't remember people's names again. The Ben Horn and his brother eating sandwiches and how they're
Yes,
just like
yes.
they're luxuriating over these enormous sandwiches for like minutes at a time. It's
Yeah.
like, what is this? Why
I
is this
know.
on TV?
I know, it's wild. I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I feel like Leland singing like the Mersey notes and goes that whole thing too just kind of comes up a lot, and you're like, similarly, I mean, obviously he's like coming apart at that point, but
Yeah.
until you know that, it really stands out as just some real bizarro shit.
Yeah. And obviously a huge amount of the, I think, success of everything David Lynch did, but that show, like, to get the tone right, you need good music, and Angelo Badalamenti's music is perfect.
Incredible. Yeah.
The theme song is iconic in a lot of ways, or echoic, actually. Anybody who uses iconic for sounds, you can't, because it means visual. Anyway.
I love that. Have you ever seen the video of Angelo explaining how he came up with the theme?
I don't think so. I don't think I
I
have.
would recommend it. If anybody is listening and wants to see that, there's a clip of him. It's from, I can't remember what documentary, but it's him explaining, and he was talking about how as he was starting to come up with music, and David Lynch would tell him like, okay, now like visualize that you're in the forest, and he would just kind of play almost like stream of consciousness, and then he's like, now like you're seeing Laura, and that's when like the real kind of like it boosts up. It's like a really beautiful thing, and he's playing the song as he's like explaining it. Very great stuff.
I'll have to find that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
But boy, like, I love it when collaborators like that have a really long relationship and kind of can do that. Like if somebody just going visualize a forest, okay, like you just have to go with it when you're working with somebody like that. And I think that the music is so kind of heartstring pulling, but in a silly way at times too. But it's perfect for that, because it is kind of at times, you know, it's a critique or kind of a parody of nighttime soap operas and how dramatic they are.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's dramatic, but also like really bad stuff happens. So it should be dramatic too at the same time.
Right. Yeah. The theme comes in sometimes at some really almost goofy places, but every time it's like, it's goofy, and yet the theme is so strong, you like kind of want to cry every time you hear it, which is this weird juxtaposition.
Yeah. I think Bob / Leland attacking Maddie, played by Shirley again, is straight up one of the like hardest scenes to watch, and it was on regular ass television.
I know. Rewatching that this time was more upsetting than I had even remembered, which you hear people say a lot, like, oh yeah, it's upsetting, but I don't know, man, rewatching it just kind of, it's always bolder than I had remembered. It's also like that episode, you know, it ends with like the performance and the oh gosh, now people are gonna be mad at me, I forget the location. What's the Roadhouse, right? Where they're at the, you know, watching that, and that, like, to me, that episode is where I feel like almost Lynch is like filmography even changes. Like you see kind of strains of that in everything he makes afterwards too. In that particular episode, it just kind of bleeds through like everything he makes afterwards from that point, and it's really interesting to watch it in the context of his late stage, or like, you know,
Yeah.
kind of the before Twin Peaks, after Twin Peaks. His filmography really changes, and yeah,
Oh yeah,
interesting.
for sure. Like he really
Yeah,
allows himself to, because I think one of the I watched everything really out of order, all of his work. One of the last things of his I actually watched was Blue Velvet,
yeah,
which by the time I actually watched it was like, oh, this is pretty straightforward. Like
yeah,
it goes, extreme at times, but it's easy to
yeah.
follow. It's not that weird, but
Right.
you can see how that, especially coming off of Dune, which he famously like had a bad time making because it was so strict and so within the realm of the studio system, um, or whatever was left of the studio system.
Yeah.
Um, and then he makes Blue Velvet, which is just sort of like the make good from Dino De Laurentiis. Like, okay, man, I'm sorry,
Right. Right.
make another movie for us. And then that leads
Right.
directly into Twin Peaks, which is where he gets to kind of stretch, play with length and narrative and character and everything like that. And I do think like, it's easy to downplay Mark Frost's like impact on the show because he's not the kind of iconoclastic genius that David Lynch was, but like you do need a strong narrative structure
Yeah.
to then hang all this weird stuff on. Like you need
Yeah.
a solid base, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's good to bring up Mark Frost. He kind of gets buried sometimes in the conversation,
Yeah.
but he's the person who made it a television show, like helped make
Right.
it a television show. And like even The Return, I know there's like debate, like is it a, whatever, film or a television show, but I think Mark Frost made that a television show too. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely weird and doesn't like fit kind of the normal constraints of TV, but there's a beginning and an ending and credits, between each chapter. And yeah, that's really his influence, which is strong. And also Mark Frost did come up, I mean, it was him and Lynch, but I think it was Mark Frost who came up with like the concept of Laura Palmer, like
Mm-hmm.
specifically, like he based her on a real like woman he read about in a newspaper or something. So she's not just a Lynch creation, but very much a Mark Frost creation. Although I do think I had written, not to quote myself, but I wrote a piece several years ago for around when The Return was coming out for Bright Wall Dark Room, the publication, about how I feel like Laura Palmer kind of changed Lynch's whole filmography too. Like
Mm.
if you watch his earlier stuff, women don't have the most interesting role to play. In fact, like you watch Eraserhead and women are just named like woman down the hall, woman in the radiator.
Yeah.
And then after Twin Peaks, like women become the forefront of his storytelling and his kind of grappling with the ways like men annihilate women and how the
Mm-hmm.
world destroys them and stuff. That becomes like his almost main thesis going forward. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
No, I think that's a huge like, and I think like the fact that what he wanted to do with the spin-off movie essentially was just
hmm,
spend as much time with Laura as you can and
yeah,
watch her kind of she has a bad time,
yeah,
uh but see her how she wasn't she was a victim, but she wasn't the victim. Does that make sense?
right,
Like
yeah, yeah,
she was strong enough in the moment to like make her own choices and everything like that, and she just had to suffer at the hands of all these horrible men in her life. Yeah,
yeah,
completely. Um
yeah. It kind of shows how, because like she has this terrible life, drugs and prostitution and all of that, but then she also is like a volunteer for Meals for Wheels and helps like disabled children and is like
yeah.
this kind of like embodiment of good too, and it makes the tragedy all the more horrible, because it's like if all these bad things weren't happening to her, if her if Bob slash her
Mm,
father weren't like assaulting her, like what kind of person could she have been? It's just a
yeah.
really, yeah, added tragedy to the whole thing.
And that I think is, so much of especially the first season, but the pilot really is like, oh my God, this, perfect angel in the community was murdered. Oh, why would this happen?
Yeah,
Everyone else is pretty terrible, but she was perfect. And then like you slowly learn like about all this other stuff she was into, and people are kind
yeah,
of going, oh my God, Laura was into all this stuff, whatever. And I think that like it would be easy for to just allow people to acknowledge her as like, oh, well, she was actually a bad seed and stuff like that. And that he
Yeah.
made the movie partially to just like say that wasn't exactly what, you know, let's actually see what she was like when she was alive instead of, and dealing with, you know, supernatural
Yeah.
and very real horrors in her life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm really glad that he chose to do that, because, you know, with a movie, you could do kind of whatever. I think the safe choice would have been to like make it a goofy Dale Cooper movie or so, you know, something more like fan servicey. And the
yeah,
fact that he like just completely rejected that and was like, no, I'm gonna make you sit in the discomfort of like what this show was really about and what was happening underneath it all is great. And just, I mean, I understand why it was a controversial choice
oh
at the
sure,
time, but it's one of those films that I think, you know, it has really just aged perfectly, even though, as we discussed, it's like one of the most disturbing one of
yeah.
the most disturbing things you could possibly watch.
So before we get to that, because I obviously want to spend a good amount of time, let's talk about the rest of season 2 real fast.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I do think some of it works,
Yeah.
and obviously Lynch himself directed what was going to be the series, you know, meant to be the season finale, but ended up being the series finale.
Yeah.
And that episode's good and
Really
crazy
good.
as well.
Hmm.
But so much of that stuff, I think James really gets the short end of the stick. He has to go, and
Yeah.
he has the worst storyline by far.
Yeah. I think Lucy and Andy have the second worst one too. That was
It's
the
pretty
one.
bad. It's pretty bad.
The like, who's the daddy story? Like that was way more annoying than I had remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Audrey has almost nothing to do. Like, I understand that there
Yeah.
was a lot of like behind the scenes reasons why that was the case, but
Yeah.
Audrey was the most interesting character, or one of the most interesting characters of season 1 and part of 2. And then all of a sudden she just kind of stands there. Like there's that, what is it? A couple of episodes before the end where there's like a beauty pageant or talent show or something
Yeah.
like that. And it's like,
I was just
oh, Lord
I
in
was
heaven.
just about to bring that up. That's the one where it's really just like, I don't know if it's the studio or whoever just being like, we got all these pretty ladies in the show, so let's put them in a
Oh,
beauty contest. And it's just really not a great time at all.
I think it's funny that Gordon Cole continues to be a pretty main character for a while. And
Yeah.
so it's like Lynch going, well, I'm not really in charge of the show anymore, but I'm still going to be in the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weird.
Exactly. Yeah. It is weird. It's funny. I mean, this threads into the return, but so maybe we can talk about it more then. But I find it really interesting, the role he plays too, because I wrote a piece also. Again, I keep quoting myself, but I was actively covering Twin Peaks for a time, and I wrote something, and this was supposed to be kind of a not like a real piece to take too seriously, but I was kind of criticizing the whole uh, Mary Sue kind of thing that
Sure.
people accuse of women characters, and I was like, if you really want to like use that as a term, look at how David Lynch inserts himself into Twin Peaks. He's always flirting with the pretty ladies and gets to say the cool lines, and it's kind of like him. I don't know. I mean, I'm not criticizing it. I actually think it's great, but it's just like funny how that when it's leveled against like female creators is a big complaint. And
Yeah.
with him, it's just like he's inserting himself to make him kind of like the coolest guy ever, and it's yeah, you can see it a lot, especially in the second season when he's flirting with Shelley, and just kind of think to have all of the bad stuff going on.
And look, I get it. I do that too, but
Oh, me too. Yeah. Again, not a criticism. It's
yeah.
great. It's just it was me kind of barking back at
Yeah.
fanboy
No,
types who love.
absolutely.
Yeah.
What is the stupid internet phrase for a male Mary Sue? Gary
I know.
Sue?
Yeah, Gary Sue. Yes, you're right.
Stupid. It's dumb.
It's very dumb. I think that was like a big thing for a while, where just like every female character who was cool or good at something was a Mary Sue. So that was why
Because
I
you don't
wrote
see
that
them
one.
studying for hours and
Yes.
hours. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
or you don't accept that they're just a female, like a character in a movie, you know, so they're
Right.
not supposed to be totally real. Yeah.
But weirdly fitting for the conversation we're having, but like
Yeah.
David Lynch seemed to be constantly bucking the like, well, that wouldn't happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would, because it's a TV show / movie. Like
Yeah.
it can happen. Anything can happen because
I
it's not
know.
real.
It's not real. And in fact, it's like very not real in Twin Peaks with all the like metaphysical
Yeah.
stuff going on too. Yeah.
I think, you know, I'm not the only first person to say this, but like, while he's not an amazing character across the board in every single appearance, I do like that they gave Dale Cooper a nemesis in the form of Wyndham Earl in the second season,
Yes.
because he does need
Yes.
something. You know what I mean? Like, there's really no reason for him to stick around after you figure out who killed Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
So
He
why is
needs
he
a,
still there? Like,
I
I
know.
think it
That's
makes sense.
actually, yeah, he needs a foil. I do think that that works as a good device too. Yeah, it is funny how much, even in the first season, you start to be kind of like, even though he hasn't, the crime hasn't been solved or whatever, you're still kind of after a while like, why is this guy like just hanging around? Obviously for the vibes, and obviously because it's a TV show again, where it's
Yeah.
not following total logic, but it is kind of funny how he's spinning wheels a lot just to do quirky stuff to, you know, be a cool Kyle MacLachlan character. But yeah, definitely.
Um, what do you like about, you just watched the second season. What did you like about it? Like, other than
Yeah.
the early parts, which were good.
So one of my favorite characters in the whole show is Garland Briggs, Bobby's dad, and
Mm,
I forgot that his kind of conspiracy stuff in the second season is pretty neat. It kind of brings in like a UFO, like alien element to things, but
yeah.
that weirdly all plays out. Like his stuff really plays out in the return, so it actually ends up being pretty important. Um, but yeah, I think that was the stuff. I mean, I liked that the first time around too, but I was kind of struck with how much he's like secretly kind of the most important character, one of the most important characters on the show. Yeah, so that thread I really enjoy.
Yeah. He ended up being, yeah. I mean, the actor had since passed on or wasn't available. I
Yeah,
forget which one, but I believe he was passed on. But like,
yeah,
he's a huge part of the return.
yeah,
Major
yeah.
Briggs is like a major character.
Yeah, yeah. And in the first couple seasons, just like every time he's on screen, he says something that just makes you cry. He's just like such a loving dad and just like such a purposeful person. And yeah, he really struck me just throughout this whole rewatch this time around how much I like him. He's also, if you like read the Mark Frost kind of tie-in books, a lot of Garland Briggs action in those.
What do you think about John Justice Wheeler, who is the best name of anyone ever?
I literally am like, wait, who is that?
That was
John
Billy Zane.
Justice, Billy Zane. Okay, yes. Me now being bad with the names, I'm like, well, who
Yeah.
is that? I love Billy Zane. Did I ever tell you, this is an aside, but it's
Love
relevant
it.
to this conversation. I had a roommate once who her mom was staying with us for like a week, just like visiting, and her mom's friend came over, and her mom's friend was Billy Zane's cousin. And the whole time, for whatever reason, like as someone who's like interviewed and met like real celebrities, for some reason having Billy Zane's cousin in my house was weirdly exciting to me. Like I was in the next room just trying to refrain from asking Twin Peaks and Titanic and stuff. Um, so not, I guess that's not totally relevant to this, but just emphasizing that I think Billy Zane is great and should, like, what's he up to these days?
He's in a lot of not amazing films, I
Yeah.
think, unfortunately. Every couple of years I rewatch Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight, and he's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
stinking good in that movie.
He's really good. That's why I'm kind of like, why is he not doing things? I mean, he's kind of hammy, so I don't know if he fits into
Yeah.
modern kind of film in the same way, but
Oh, I guess he was
now
in The Boys a couple
oh,
episodes. I don't watch that show. I don't know.
I don't either. The Boys seems to be like kind of a receptacle for like guys like that who have kind of disappeared, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot of stuff that I recognize in this IMDb here for a while. He played himself in Zoolander 2.
I was literally just about to be like, the last time I really have like a memory of him is in the Zoolander movie.
Oh boy. Well, we love you, Billy Zane.
Yeah.
Honorary laser focus hero. I don't know.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they had to just bring in a bunch of characters. I think that was the main thing
Yeah.
about the season 2 is like once you wrap up all the main, but that's what really blew my mind. It's like you already have so many characters.
I
Why are
know.
you bringing in more characters?
I know. That's what I like. I literally just now could not remember that name because there is kind of an onslaught of
Yeah.
people in that second season where it's like, and you really like, yeah, your allegiance still lies with all the people from the first season. So it starts to feel a little bit like clutter.
Yeah. Um and then some things happen to some of the characters. Um, some of them become doorknobs or whatever
I
happened to.
John Chen, yeah.
That is really upsetting.
Yeah, I know. I
Uh,
feel wasn't there some behind the scenes stuff with her being
yeah,
downplayed too?
I
Yeah.
can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, there was something like she wanted to leave or didn't want, whatever, was
Yeah, I don't
unhappy with
remember.
her lot in life or whatever, and then
Yeah,
they just kind of wrote her out, made her
right.
a doorknob again, or
And never I
whatever.
don't believe that's even addressed in the return, at least
No,
not to my memory.
not even a
So
little bit.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's weird that Michael Ontkeen is alive, didn't want to be in
Yeah.
the return. It's weird.
Yeah. He was in what's the George Clooney movie? I can't remember, but it was like it's because he just lives in Hawaii and just wants to stay there. So if a movie
Which I
films him,
mean, I am all for
yeah,
people just being retired. Good for you.
yeah, I
Like
know,
I'm
I
happy
know.
with that.
But he'll
Uh,
pop up if they're like filming in his backyard or
yeah,
something.
The
So
Descendants. He was in that one because
Descendants,
that
yeah,
shot in Hawaii.
yeah,
Um, yeah. I'm just making sure that we mention some of the people that Piper Laurie
yeah.
is always great. First of all.
Except for she is one that gets the problematic storyline
Oh
in the
yeah.
second
Oh no, I
season.
forgot about that. Yep, you're right.
Yeah, I forgot about it too until she popped up, and I was like, "Oh shit, I forgot about this." And it lasts a lot longer than you would want it to. It's like
Yeah.
multiple episodes. Um, yeah. Although I will like, not to give it any credit, but you don't recognize her at all for a while. So they, good
Yeah.
job on the makeup, but yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
Especially once you like realize you're like, oh no, because
Yeah,
we don't need to get into it, but
I
they
know
should
it's
not
bad.
have done that, as always is the
No,
case.
yeah.
Um,
One of the few things that does not age well, because weirdly, a lot of the other stuff ages well. Like even the show's portrayal of like trans characters
sure.
and Native American characters, and like there's a lot of like sort of appreciation for like indigenous culture in the film that I know like Michael Horse actually contributed to. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
like some great stuff. Speaking of Michael Horse, just a great. I interviewed him for Nerdist.com,
That's
and
right.
it was my favorite person I've ever interviewed. He was so freaking cool. So every time I watch the show now, I'm just like, that's my guy. I love Deputy Hawk.
He was also in a season 1 episode of The X-Files.
Yes, I do recall that. I don't remember if that episode was problematic at all. I feel like maybe it was, but
I don't really remember. I think it was because that was season 1, so I was
yeah,
a child when that one came out. But that's the werewolf one where,
I think so. Yeah,
yeah, I don't remember. It's been a long time since I watched that one. It's not
yeah,
one I
same.
rewatch. I'll say that.
No, me neither.
Okay, so let's get into Firewalk with Me because it it messed me up for a good like 2 weeks where I'm just like
Yeah.
thinking about every scene. All the weird scenes are so much creepier than
Hmm.
anything I thought was going to be in it. And then of course you're meant to, in order to understand the return, watch all the deleted footage, which I
Right.
liked. I think most of that stuff is great, actually.
It
Like
really is.
you
Yeah.
get a lot of the other characters from Twin Peaks who were sort of left out of the theatrical cut. But the David Bowie scene is nuts.
So nuts. I know. I always like know that he's in it, but I kind of like every time I watch it for some reason I kind of forget exactly like how he comes up like I vaguely remember, and then when it happens I'm always like, yeah, this is so
And
this
then
is so
he's
weird.
doing a weird Southern accent just
Yeah, yeah.
cause
And
he
is also weirdly important in the return, like in a abstract way.
since he had passed on long before, or
Yeah,
just actually right before.
right before,
Um
yeah.
he he's a giant talking kettle.
Tea kettle, yeah.
Tea kettle.
Yeah. I know. I think he was supposed to actually be in the show and
I
then
think, yeah, he
passed
was.
away.
He was
Yeah.
gonna be.
Yeah.
Agent Jeffries, who was only in
Yep.
that one scene. Who do you think
Yeah.
you are there?
The whole opening of Firewalk with Me is interesting. I feel like it was just kind of like, we got to get a couple of real famous people in here and
Yeah.
have Dale Cooper have a reason for him to be in this movie, just for like the purpose of that
Yeah.
being like kind of the main character of the show. And then it's like, let's get into the real
Yeah.
purpose here.
Well, the whole I think what really made people annoyed is that it didn't continue on,
Yeah.
that crazy wild cliffhanger from the second season, which in the return also doesn't really get like resolved for a long time. But that
Yeah.
whole beginning with Chris Isaac, eh, it took me maybe a couple viewings of the film to really kind of get what that scene was. And
Yeah.
it's like he's a mirror image of Dale Cooper in a twisted, horrible version of Twin Peaks. Like he's
Right.
in a town across the state line,
Right.
which is terrible, and the local police don't want anything to do with him, and everyone sucks and everyone hates each
Yeah.
other, and like there's nothing wholesome there at all. Like the diner is like neon light, and
Right.
the pie is terrible. Like just stuff like
Yeah.
it's all exactly the opposite. And
But
then
that
he
feels
happens.
a good setup for like what this film will be, right? It's almost like David Lynch being like, this is going to be the bleak version of
Yeah,
the story. Yeah.
it's a Blue Rose special.
Mm-hmm.
Um that again, that's him yelling a lot and the woman
Yeah.
acting out. It it is such a strange movie. I know
Yeah.
it
I'd forgotten about the woman acting out all the like clues or whatever
yeah,
that they need to look for, which is honestly great and really funny, but
yeah.
takes you back for a minute.
Yeah, it's also I always forget Kiefer Sutherland's in it.
Yeah, I know. I forgot he was in it too. And kind of like, importantly for a while
Mhm.
there. Yeah.
Um and then then we get to actual Twin Peaks. So the part that really creeped me out the most, obviously all the stuff with Laura is really harrowing and, it's upsetting to watch and everything like that. But the stuff that really
Mm.
creeped me out was all of the woodsmen in
Mm.
the room above the gas station and like all that
Yeah.
stuff is it just creeps me out so bad. And
It's
like the old lady and the
the
boy and the
picture that
monkey and everything. Good God, that's
I
so
know.
scary.
I think to me the like, the woman gives Laura Palmer the photo of like the door and then she kind of goes through it in sort of like a nightmarish way.
Yeah.
For some reason that concept is so creepy to me to just like have a painting on your wall that's like a looks very normal but is like this access point to just this like horrible dark world. um I don't know, that always makes me really uncomfortable too. I thought about buying a print of that
Oh, really?
and
Just to
putting it up
face
on
your
my wall
fears.
just to see if anyone, that's a real deep
Yeah.
cut probably reference.
The other like on that part and parcel to that same thing is like, which I don't think is followed up at all in the return, but like the idea that these beings feast off of the misery of humanity in the form of corn,
Garbon. Oh my god, I can never pronounce it right.
Garmonbozia.
Garmonbozia. Yes, that
Oh,
is repulsive.
it's
And I
repulsive.
and I forgot, like at the end, not to skip too far ahead, but at the end of the movie, like I always remember the last kind of 20 minutes. They're some of the most upsetting thing you can watch. But I forget that there's kind of a little interstitial where they're just eating the cream corn. So it's already like a horrible thing, and then there's just this repulsive like corn eating or
Hmm.
corn on the floor. I can't remember exactly the term it's in, but it's really disgusting.
And then the scene where Mike, who you think is a good guy, but like he's hanging out with these guys and he still eats all
Yeah,
the corn with them and stuff like that. So that kind of like weirded me out where he's like screaming at Leland
yeah, yeah.
and Leland's like revving the engine so Laura can't hear. And it's just like, it's just a miserable, a
That
miserable few
scene
minutes.
is that scene is really, I think, actually to me one of the most upsetting parts in the movie, just because it goes on for so long. It's just like so uncomfortable, and it just
Yeah.
really like, I don't know. I think it serves the purpose of just making you really on edge for everything that comes after. But yeah, it's really dark.
There's a level of like, not quite physical uncanny valley, but just like behavioral uncanny valley stuff in a lot of his work, but in
Yeah.
the movie and The Return especially, where um like if you were to just describe any David Lynch scene, like, and obviously this is reductive, but it would be somebody doing something weird,
Mhm.
somebody else laughing at that thing, and then a woman just screaming in horror at the weird thing that isn't itself scary, but because she's so afraid of it, it makes us afraid of it. Like,
Yes,
that feels to
yes.
me like that's what David Lynch does a lot.
Yeah, stuff like that happens a lot in The Return too. There'll just be a woman screaming at like there's another like car accident thing in that,
Yeah.
you know, thing where it's just people screaming in their cars. Yeah, that's it's a really good way of summing that up.
Yeah, it's someone finding something so terrifying that they have to just immediately blood-curdlingly scream. But the thing itself, we just kind of go, well, it's not that weird. But
Yeah,
now it
yeah.
is, because you're screaming at it. Like, yeah,
Yeah. It's making the ordinary like frightening, which
yeah,
is I think one of the to me it like kind of feels like almost like childhood fears. You know, when you're a
yeah.
kid you're like afraid of things that
Oh, yeah.
aren't actually I used to be afraid of ceiling fans when I was a child. Like I thought that was the scariest
Oh,
thing
so then
for
it must be a terrifying movie for you, because
yeah.
there's a huge ceiling
It's,
fan
the
moment.
ceiling fan motif in Twin Peaks. I mean, to be clear, I'm not still afraid of ceiling
Okay.
fans, but as a kid, something about the whirring and the like blades of that like scared me,
Yeah,
and that feels like something evident in like Twin Peaks too. It's just like very normal things can be played up for terror, and it's brings you back to that kind of feeling, at least for me.
yeah. You know why? This is a tangent, but do you know why the movie Skinamarink didn't really work for me?
Why?
It's because the kids aren't afraid of anything in it.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good
it's all
point.
about what kids are afraid of, and the kids just sit there and watch cartoons, and they don't
Yeah,
actively seem afraid ever. And it's like, well, then it's just kind of
yeah.
boring. Then there's no
That's a good point. It worked for me because it evoked that feeling of being scared
sure.
of those things when you're a kid, but you're right, like the kids in the actual story are not experiencing
And to
that.
be clear, like, there are obviously things in that movie that are creepy, and
Yeah.
it's like it's so dark, and the the apertures open so much so that everything just looks distorted and everything. But
Yeah.
like, that's why, like, nothing ever built. Like, if that were like a 10-minute short, it would have been excellent. But
Yeah.
because it was a feature and you're just watching these kids kind of just sit there,
Right.
I don't know. But
No, I
but
get
it
that.
needed something like that. It needed them to be afraid, or it needed some sort of like growing. The scene with the parents in the bedroom, that's, oof, boy,
Yeah.
that's some
I
nightmare fuel there. But
I really liked Skinamarink and it scared me, but I'm also not like a defender because I risked like very particular
I
to
was so excited to watch it. I I
yeah.
got a screener for it. So I had it on my computer. I turned all the lights off in the house. It was that kind of, it wasn't quite like night yet. It was sort of like that late dusk where you can still kind of see stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be perfect. And I just
Yeah.
was like, all right,
Didn't hit.
didn't
Yeah.
quite hit me, but, um, yeah. So, and then obviously we do spend a huge amount of time with, most of the, movie is with Laura. And I think Shirley is so underrated. She's incredible in this movie.
I think it's one of the great like female performances on
Yeah.
film, just period. Like it's so just wild. And the fact that she wasn't even an actress before Twin Peaks, like not really, is kind of insane when you watch this. And I don't know, she feels more natural and I don't know, just like really, really insanely good.
Since watching all of this, I rewatched John Carpenter's Vampires, which she is
Hmm.
in,
Okay.
and she's good in. I don't know if you've ever seen Vampires.
I think it's one of those ones I've seen on like TV maybe years
Sure.
ago, but I don't remember it.
So the premise is that she has been bitten by a vampire, and she is slowly turning into one. And so these
Okay.
vampire hunters are using her kind of psychic connection to the head vampire to find the coven or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but it's mostly James Woods and Daniel Baldwin slapping and or punching her. And it's like, why is this a movie?
Yeah.
And then her
Two
being
inter-
kind of into it because she's a vampire now. It's like,
right.
ugh, I don't like this.
Two interesting men to be
Yeah,
in
weird,
that
right?
particular role.
In
Yeah, yeah,
retrospect.
yeah. Yikes.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's one that really went down in my, because I remember when I first watched it when I was a teenager, it was like, oh, cool.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
stake through his face or whatever. But
yeah. I know a lot of those horror movies and sequels and stuff that seem cool when you're a kid, and then you watch them older, and it's like, oh, you know, not a lot of great stuff going on here.
no, I remember thinking Ghost of Mars was pretty good when I saw it when I was
Yeah,
16, but
That's one I haven't revisited
It's not good.
either.
You're
Yeah.
fine. You're fine to not watch that one.
Yeah. I kind of, yeah. I'm like a hit or miss with Carpenter stuff.
I think
Obviously,
anything post In the Mouth of Madness, just don't even worry
yeah,
about it.
that's my favorite one.
Yeah, it's
So,
great.
yeah,
I just rewatched that one for Halloween. It's so good.
it's so good.
Yeah.
I had only seen it, I saw it at Music Box here in Chicago, does a like 24-hour movie marathon. And I mean, this was years ago, but that's where I first saw it. I think it was the one that played like at midnight. And that's another one that actually weirdly kind of has a Fire Walk With Me thing with like the painting, that like changes or whatever. Like, yeah, kind of that surrealness. That would also be an interesting double feature with Fire Walk With Me. I'm just thinking of double feature ideas for David Lynch movies.
Yeah, that actually, I like that. I like that idea somehow.
Yeah.
You should write it for Nerdist.com.
Yeah.
Things to pair with David Lynch
Maybe
movies.
I will. Literally jotting this down.
But yeah, for a long time, we didn't realize that there was ever going to be any other Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me. I didn't watch initially, obviously, until 2020. By that point, the return had already come back and everything. And I don't remember why. I think I had heard that people like walked out at screenings at Cannes and stuff like that. And I don't know. I definitely think with Lynch just across the board, like I need to sit and simmer with most of his works.
Yes.
Few are the ones where the first viewing I go, man, that was great.
Yeah.
Or, because like Lost Highway, which we were just talking before we started recording, I now view as maybe like one of my top 3 David Lynch movies. I didn't even finish it the first time I watched it. I got to the scene where Robert Blake is talking to Bill Pullman at the party, and he calls and says, "Call your house and talk to me. I'm on the phone." And I was like, "Nope, I don't know what this is. Nope, I'm out."
That's so scary. Oh my God. Rewatching that really creeped me out recently too. Yeah. Yeah.
Ask me.
No, it's so creepy. The close up of his mouth and stuff. Yeah. Gets me. No, I'm the same way. Like Lynch is probably ultimately like my favorite filmmaker.
Honestly, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. If I really had to boil it down. Yeah. But it's the same thing for me. Like every time I watched when I was first watching his stuff, I almost like didn't like it at first. I think, and then, but it lasts, like you can't stop thinking about it. And same with like when I said I watched Mulholland Drive as like a teenager, I did not forget that movie for like the next whatever decade until I rewatched it, or I can't remember how long before I rewatched it, but it, like just pieces of it stuck with me. And it's almost like his movies. I mean, obviously they talk a lot about how they're dreamlike or whatever, but it is kind of like how you remember dreams, right? Like you remember bits and pieces of things and they stick with you, and that's really kind of the magic of his work.
And I think a lot of it for me too was like kind of just learning more about what he was and like what he was all about and stuff like that, and like reading his book, reeling the big fish, catching the big fish, which was, I thought, really interesting and just kind of about dreams. He's big into dreams, or was big into dreams, and realizing that most of his movies work on dream logic.
Meditation logic.
Meditation logic that immediately like opens things up.
I always tell people, because I have friends like, I think a lot of people are aware of Lynch the person, but not like, they're kind of intimidated by his films or don't get it if they watch one. And I always tell people kind of what you said, like watch his interviews and watch videos of him, like get a sense of the person, and like that will click. Like that will make his movies just make more sense to you. It'll make it clear that like you don't need to figure things out, or I don't know, it just gets you on the same wavelength as him.
So Return, I think you and I have talked at length, but we can both kind of agree is a masterpiece in some ways.
Yeah.
And yet at other times I'm like, it's especially the first time you're watching it, there are episodes you're like, what? And there's maybe 1 or 2 scenes that are like, oh, that was great. And then you spend 85 minutes with Dougie Jones, and like, where do you fall on the Doug Jones thing of it? Because I have heard people say, well, once you watch it the first time, you can just skip all the Dougie Jones stuff, which I guess is accurate. You can do that with anything.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, you could do that with anything on Earth if you're rewatching it. You can just skip to the stuff you like. I force myself because you're right, like it tests your patience. A
Yeah.
lot of stuff does. I think the stuff that this watch around really I was like, I don't give a shit was all of the like Jim Belushi, like Vegas kind of stuff. Like that stuff I didn't care about. And it's related to Dougie. It all kind of
Yeah.
plays
Oh,
into
yeah,
that.
kind of. All the Vegas stuff I
Yeah.
just don't like.
Yeah, I just like didn't it didn't work for me, but I forced myself to sit through it and watch it because I was just like it's part of the whole picture and
Yeah.
like it feels weird to pick and choose. It's like why are you watching it then? So it's I feel that way when people are like, "Can I skip like this season of this show or whatever?" I'm like, "Why don't you just watch it?"
Yeah.
Watch it and make up your mind if you like it or not. But I it's one of my most loathed questions. Like, do I need to watch the movie first? It's like just do it. Like you decide. But I yeah, so I forced myself. The Dougie stuff is definitely, to me, among the least interesting things, like stuff going on. But again, it adds. It's similar to what we were saying with his other stuff. Like it adds, it like adds a cadence to the show, right? That puts you in the right mood. So it might be annoying at times, but it's almost like he wants you to be a little bit
Yeah.
annoyed,
I
so
think that's
that
accurate.
yeah, so that stuff hits kind of in the right places when it needs to, and it makes like when the incredible stuff happens, like the famous episode 8, like
Yeah.
when that lands kind of when it does in the show, it feels like this almost like reprieve in a way from everything else going on, even though it's insane and scary and all of that. It's like this release of it feels like the weird stuff is kind of allowing for that. So yeah, I there's absolutely parts of the return that just feel endless and obnoxious, but I still really love them as like a whole piece of it,
Yeah. Well, there's so much of the Dougie stuff that I obviously is intentional because I don't think anything was like,
Yeah.
I don't think Lynch thought that that was going to be really compelling television. I think he did it
No.
because he was actively trying to delay the gratification of having
Yeah,
Dale Cooper back. And then once
exactly.
he does come back, it's less gratifying because he's only actually like our Dale Cooper for like an,
2 episodes.
yeah,
An episode,
effectively an
really. Yeah,
episode.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
then in the last episode, he's gone
In
through the,
some other
yeah, realm
world.
or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of Kyle MacLachlan in it because he's both evil Cooper and Dougie Jones. And the
Yeah.
Dougie Jones stuff is literally just him Mr. Magooing his way through, like, yeah, it's ridiculous. This guy who
Yeah.
can't even, you know, feed himself or use the bathroom on his own is somehow the savior of this company and like keeping people out of jail and like,
Right. But it plays into kind of his overall theme, right? Which is like male buffoonery is like rewarded and
yeah.
like women are punished for
Right.
existing, and it's kind of like a weird like extreme version of that, like male incompetence being rewarded. um but yeah, it's definitely, you're right, like I think the thing that I noticed the most with this, and it starts again kind of in Fire Walk with Me, is just his like insistence of like patience. He really wants
Hmm.
you to like not just, he's sort of like moving against the grain of like our, we want things to be digestible and quick and whatever, and he's forcing you to slow down. And a lot of those scenes I think are there for that reason, like to make you think in between stuff. There's
Yeah.
like the scene where the guy's just like mopping for like 10 minutes or whatever, and like that's annoying kind of when you're watching it, but it does force you to just sit in the world and think about what's like happening in between scenes. So it does all serve a larger purpose. But there are times when like the show actually feels outright bad. Like there's stuff where
Honestly,
you're just
yeah.
like this is actually shitty. um but yeah, again, it's like the magic of Lynch. It just altogether, it just like hits you in such an interesting way. And yeah, I don't know.
And you're right. Like you do need to kind of sit through all of that stuff to kind of appreciate where he's going with everything else. Because obviously there are moments of just like absolute horror and, there's like outright supernatural horror, but then there's also like, yeah, uh, the kid getting hit by the car and like,
Yeah,
which is awful. And then like the weird breakdown in the road outside the diner where Bobby goes and like, there's that
yeah,
kid just throwing up on himself while his mom just like yells about traffic. And
yells.
like, it's just like the world is awful. And then like,
Yeah,
there's Alicia Witt in that one scene that she's in, literally playing the little girl from Twin Peaks, who is now like
yeah.
like a crack
Yeah.
user. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, it's so bad. Like everything
Yeah, I
else is so
know.
bad. And so you need the kind of levity of the Dougie Jones stuff. Otherwise 18 episodes would be too much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think too, like, it makes the when when there's obviously long bouts and episodes and such where you don't see any of like the familiar
Yeah.
characters, but again, it makes the reward of seeing those people all the sweeter because you've sat through a lot of stuff that is kind of testing your patience, and then it's like, oh, there's Bobby, and it just
Yeah.
like feels weirdly magical. So, which, speaking of Bobby, to me, like MVP of the return, like watching it this time, I was like, what an amazing
Yeah.
performance from
And
Dan
what a
Ashbrook.
turnaround for the character. Cause
Yeah,
it's Bobby killing a guy in
yeah,
Fire Walk with Me that leads to all this bad stuff happening.
yeah,
Um, and such a nice guy. He's the one who is the most emotional about everything. And like,
yeah,
you get the sense that like his relationship with his dad got better and like everything like
yeah.
it's really nice. It's really
It's like
nice.
a
Like,
yeah. It's one of the few like character arcs that doesn't feel like totally depressing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And the stuff that I find really interesting too, that I didn't totally. I mean, it's obviously there, but I think it just hit me a little bit more this time. Was like the stuff with his daughter, played by Amanda Seyfried,
yeah.
um, is kind of like a parallel of Laura, right? It's like this beautiful blonde woman who's getting into drugs and is just like this pure nice girl who's being corrupted by all the shit around her, and it's almost like Laura lives on through his daughter, like his ex-girlfriend living on through his daughter is very um I don't know, it's poetic, if you will.
Yeah. I agree. And they're not in it that much, but like Peggy Lipton and uh, uh Everett McGill
Action.
are really
Oh
good.
yeah,
And
oh yeah, yeah,
Mädchen Amick, yeah, as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
I do think that like Audrey gets the weirdest storyline again.
yeah,
I like
yeah,
it as once you kind of get a sense of what it actually is, that
right,
she is literally trapped. She can't, but you're just sitting
yeah.
there watching her not leave the house and you're just like, what is going on here?
I know. And that one takes, I can't remember exactly when, but it's a long time
It's a
before she
long
shows
time.
up. Yeah. And I think I knew she was in the show, like when I was watching it just from press releases and
Sure.
such. But like, as it was going along, I was like, is this going to be some weird like tea kettle type thing too? Or it's just like she's a voice for 5 seconds? Like, I don't know. That's another thing that
Yeah. I think
you
she's in
really
the,
start to
the
wonder.
least amount of episodes of any of the main cast.
Yeah, I think so too.
Um, and only has scenes with that one. And I remember like hearing it's either on the Blu-rays or elsewhere, but like she had an issue with David Lynch. Like she's like, why am I
Yeah.
barely in this? Like,
Yeah.
are you mad at me? Or, like that kind of thing. And like,
Yeah. I
I
think
get it.
like I might be wrong, but I think like she originally had a different storyline or something
Mm,
too, and he like rewrote it for her or something like that. Or maybe rewrote it to be worse. It's like punishment. I don't really know. I don't
yeah.
think that's something he would do, but yeah, I think her story is like yeah, kind of the most bleak too when you realize that like how her weird son was conceived and just like the real like kind of horror of all of that is really depressing when you think of it. But also, again, into his theme, I know sometimes there's complaints or criticisms that David Lynch uses like sexual assault a lot with his
Mm,
female characters and how, but of all directors, male directors who dabble in that kind of storytelling, I think he does it the most purposefully and the most empathetically. Like that's
yeah.
another thing that really comes through when you watch like Fire Walk with Me, just like the enormous amount of empathy for Laura, and that kind of I think laces through with all of the women in the return too. Like horrible things are happening to them, but he makes it very clear that it's because of the absolute horror of evil men and not like
Yeah.
anything that they do. Yeah, I don't know. There's a more tender touch to all of that
Yeah. And
than
there's not, it's not titillation or anything like
no.
that. It's not
It's
like,
horror.
it's
Yeah.
horror. Like you
Yeah.
are, regardless of who you are, if you are watching these things and you are yourself an empathetic person or even slightly, you can't watch them without being like, um, moved in a bad way about how
Yeah.
horrible everything is to these women. Um,
Yeah. Well, and as we learn in like episode 8, which I remember being controversial at the time, that like Laura is almost this like metaphorically like from the heavens kind of sent
yeah,
as like I don't know, like a cipher sort of to Bob and or a counterbalance to all of that. And like so it's got this kind of dreamy, fantastical side to it too. But like I don't know, just the way he uses it. I don't know. I don't really
Yeah.
know where I was going with that, but like sort of like the balance of the male evil and the female good kind of is
Mm-hmm.
just really apparent. Not that his female characters are all like angels, obviously there's some real
Sure.
shithead women in this show, but I don't know, that is like a larger point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that like all that stuff with Sarah, like Sarah Palmer becomes sort of like, she's sitting there watching, because she has gone through it. If you watch the whole season
Yes.
and Fire
Yes.
Walk with Me, and then, or the whole original show, Fire Walk with Me, and then like she's only in a few episodes and she is like a shell of a person
Yeah.
who just sits there and watches videos of car crashes and animals eating each other and stuff, and just that's what she does
It's
now. And
smoking a million cigarettes. Yeah.
yeah, and then at the bar she like takes her face off and she
Yeah.
just has this like void. uh
Yeah.
uh if you read into episode 8, what I think
Yeah.
we talked about a ton, you and I, when I first watched that, was like the girl that we see in that is her, and she is like
Yeah.
she's the vessel for both Bob and Sarah and
Yeah.
Laura, and is like
Yeah.
at this point like what is she? She just
Right.
doesn't even know
Right.
how to be a person.
Yeah. Kind of purposeless, but
Yeah,
yeah, no, I know she's one of the more haunting, but also kind of funny parts. Like it's one of those things where it's like
yeah,
obviously her life is bleak and horrible and everything's bad, but like the scene of her watching like animals ripping apart meat and stuff, it like plays almost comically when it just
yeah.
comes out of nowhere, and the face ripping thing. What does she say too? She says something really funny in that scene too, where
I don't
she
remember.
it's like don't fuck with me or
Yeah.
something of that regard.
Yeah,
And she's always kind of like she's in the original series, I think by far the most melodramatic character, so it's weird to see like the intense emotion in that
yeah,
series compared to just the utter nothingness in the return.
yeah, because there's that famous shot from the pilot where it just cuts to her and she's just like mid, like there's a lot of like Greek keening, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Greek theater and stuff like that, and so she has to do a lot of that.
Yeah.
um and then, oh god, again in Fire Walk with Me, you just see like she's watching her husband like turn into a monster in front of her eyes, and that her daughter is the victim, and she just
Yeah.
sits there, she doesn't know what to do, like,
I know. That's a hard
oh
thing because she's one of those characters where it's like there's a little bit of complicity in that. Obviously,
yeah,
it's not her fault that her husband's doing that, but yeah, you see her recognizing what's going on and not really doing anything about it. But with the context of episode 8, that kind of makes more sense.
yeah.
Yeah, she's an interesting one.
Yeah, I think that episode is obviously like a film unto itself, basically.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
and then the woodsmen, who are
yeah,
terrifying. They just like, they're like locusts. They just like
I know.
strip people clean.
I forget too. Like I did know this, but I had kind of forgotten that they show up earlier. They're in like the first couple episodes too with the Matthew Lillard character, which is
Whose
also
head
great.
explodes.
Whose head explodes. They're like in the jail cell with him though, which I
Yeah.
had kind of forgotten about. Probably because like when you first watch it, you haven't seen episode 8 yet, so
Right.
they haven't,
They don't really
popped out. You don't know what that is yet.
Yeah, and especially if you just watch Fire Walk with Me, they don't look the same. Like, first of
No.
all, Jürgen Prochnow is not involved.
Right. Right.
But they look more like like in the movie they look silly, where they have these big like beards.
Yeah.
Whereas in the show they are ashen
Terrifying.
and like really terrifying.
Yeah.
Got a light.
Yeah.
And like grabbing people's faces and just like burning their
Crushing.
soul out. Like, oh god, it's so bad. Like, in a great way. Like, obviously that's
crushing their skulls, but like it takes like 5 minutes for them to die.
Yeah.
Like I forgot about that part in episode 8, which was
the radio station.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the Judy of it all, which was mentioned in Fire Walk with Me. Again, if you have to watch Fire Walk with Me. You will not
Yes.
understand The Return if you don't watch Fire Walk with Me.
I know that, speaking like what I was saying, when people are like, because I think when The Return was coming out, it was getting a lot of like interest, and obviously the film bros among us were like very excited. I'm counting myself as a
Sure.
film bro, very like enthusiastic about it. And so you'd get a lot of people asking questions like, do I have to watch the original series and the movie? And I'm like, yes. Like,
You
you
simply
do.
must,
Like,
yeah.
you simply must, unless you don't care about knowing anything that's going on.
You almost don't need to watch, like, I
Yeah,
feel
you
like
need
the
at
movie
least
is
Fire
more
Walk with
important,
Me.
is
Yeah.
the most important. And the deleted scenes, the hour and a half of
Right.
deleted scenes.
I think there are characters that aren't in Fire Walk with Me that are in The Return that have like some
Yeah.
sort of importance, and so I think you still need to.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah.
But like
My mean response whenever somebody asks me that is like, "What else are you doing? What
Yeah.
better are you doing? Watch Twin Peaks."
Yeah. Should I do this? I don't know. I'm not you. Do whatever you
Yeah, I
want.
don't care. Do whatever you want. But also, like, yeah, just watch the whole thing. I promise you.
I tried
It'll
one time
be
with my wife. I tried to, because she likes some of the Marvel movies. She likes the Guardians movies. I think she enjoys the Black Panther movies and maybe one or two other ones.
yeah.
And she was like, was curious about Endgame maybe or something like that. She was just like, what do I need to watch to? And I was like, what's the last like one in sequence you watched? And I think it was like Guardians 2 or something like that. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
geez. And I started
Yeah.
like listing movies, and I was like, you know what? You don't have to. You don't have to watch
Yeah.
anything, actually.
Yeah.
It's fine.
That's one I do think with Marvel you can kind of pick and choose. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like there's enough like cultural awareness of all those
Sure.
characters
I think
too
so.
that like, yeah, the Endgame will probably work for you still, but
Like
just
maybe some of
watch,
the bits won't, like land for you, but it's fine.
yeah, just watch Infinity War and Endgame. And
I think you're
good.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the biggest issue that I'm really hoping that the DC universe. It's like, what if I only want to watch Superman movies? Do I have to watch these other things too? No.
Yeah,
That's what I want.
I know. Yeah, I think one of my treats to myself after I was no longer at Nerdist full time was I have not watched a single Marvel.
I'm very proud of you.
Yeah, it's like very, and not that I'm not a hater or anything
No,
like that.
no.
I just like, it was a little.
It's the homework
burned out.
aspect.
Yeah, and I don't know all the background and stuff of There's plenty of lovely, smart people that know all the comic book, like all the comic references and stuff, and I did not know any of that.
I have been in the last like year or so, as just a means of trying to, make my brain happy, I guess.
Yeah.
I've been reading comic books, but not employing like maybe once or twice I have used them for work purposes, but it's like I'm currently reading Daredevil comics that have nothing to do with what's coming out. It's just like old Daredevil comics from the 80s. That's what I want to read.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I read some like graphic novels and stuff similarly, not really related to anything. And not even, I think I read some like Batman or whatever.
Sure.
Graphic novels also just as like, fun and interest. My problem with that stuff, it's similar to how I feel about sports, which is like I have such a completionist like brain.
I know that is a problem. Yeah.
That like if I'm gonna get into something and there's just there's what, like 50, 70 years for some of those, plus like comic book lore. It's like I just can't, like my brain can't go there.
I do that way too much. It really drives me crazy where it's like I wish I could just watch, and I also have to watch if I'm like I'm gonna watch this series of movies or something like that. Like this is very nerdy, but I recently watched a bunch of German murder mystery movies that were made in the late 50s through the 60s, which were the direct precursor to Italian giallo movies.
Yeah.
Okay. They were much fewer of them. There were only about 30 some. And I watched a couple and I liked them. And then I found online you could buy like Blu-ray sets of them cheaply. They were German. Some of them don't have subtitles, but most of them do.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to watch them all in order now. It's like, why am I doing this to myself? And that's what I did during Christmas. I was like, all right, well, let's just watch 3 movies today.
Yeah.
Just to check them off my list. Like,
I might need to get those titles from you because that sounds interesting.
Oh, I'll send you my Letterboxd list.
Please do.
Yeah, they're great. And they also have like, they're all basically the same two directors. There was a handful, but mostly the same two directors. They had most of the same cast. They were all
Yeah,
based on Edgar Wallace novels.
love that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, that
very,
sounds great.
very weird that they existed. But then, and then
Yeah.
there's like 3 or 4 toward the end of the cycle that are Italian-made giallo movies, but were marketed as Edgar Wallace Creamy, is what they're called,
Okay.
KRIMI, which is
I
short
have
for
heard of that.
criminal film,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
what they call crime movies in
yeah.
German.
Right. I did know that. I know some of the terms, but yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't know. My favorite thing. Sorry, now we're on like a whole movie
it's fine.
side tangent, but one of my favorite things about Letterbox, I've gotten very Letterbox pilled lately, and like just finding whole avenues of film, foreign film and genre stuff that I did not know existed at
Yep.
all. Yeah, just kind of wandering into some of that has been really cool. I've
You
been
know what
adding a lot. Yeah.
I have been watching also, not nearly as completionist because there's a lot more, but Hong Kong Category 3 films. Have you ever watched? Do you know what
Wow.
those are?
No.
So for a long time, there was no rating system in Hong Kong.
Okay.
But at a certain point, there were for video releases, there were 3 categories. Category 1 was basically like all ages family film. Category 2 was like PG basically, and then Category 3 was anything from like PG-13 through XXX, I mean, effectively.
Right.
And so
Right.
they were trying. Filmmakers were like, well, what can we get away with? Basically everything. And so a lot of them
Yeah.
are like wantonly like depraved because they were like, let's do it. Well, let's get away with these things. There's a market for Category 3 movies abroad.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of like, have you ever seen like The Story of Ricky, which is like a really, really bloody, like,
Heard of it. Haven't seen it. Yeah.
where it's just like, punching people's heads off. Like it's incredibly gory. They're also very like nasty. Like, there's a movie called Dr. Lamb, which is about a real guy who was a cab driver who kidnapped women and then like cut them up in his house. And you get to see a ton of it in this
Yeah.
movie. And
Sounds great, honestly.
these were successful movies. Anthony Wong was in a bunch of them, and he got like nominated for the Hong Kong equivalent of Oscars, and I think even won for some of them. Like one of them is called The Untold Story, which is another real story about a guy
Heard of that one, yeah.
who moved to Macau because he murdered people from a gambling debt, and then started putting human meat into dumplings.
As one does.
Ebola syndrome is another one where he gets infected with Ebola, which doesn't behave at all like what actual Ebola does. Early 90s.
Right. Yeah.
He is a carrier but doesn't like get sick from it, and so actively goes back to Hong Kong to infect people with Ebola. These are bananas movies, but they are really fun and interesting. Yeah, I'll send you that.
They sound great. Yeah,
list
they
too.
sound great. Yes, please do. Sound great and weirdly on theme with kind of Lynchy stuff too, right?
Very much.
There's like that, as you're describing that, I'm like, some of those things could be scenes in The Return. I think too, something else you said that also is thematically tied to David Lynch, and I've heard other people mention this, like since he passed, like one of the most interesting things about him is that his stuff is very kind of like art housey by nature, but he was genuinely like a very mainstream person in terms of like his, he was nominated for like best director like 3 times. Like he wasn't some underground filmmaker, even though his like work would suggest that.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I can't think of an equivalent like that, someone who makes these almost inaccessible types of art that's also like being nominated for best picture,
yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is like people just like him because he's a really just kind of salt of the earth guy. Like,
he also like in his early career got kind of the backing of some of the other mainstream guys like Mel Brooks and Stanley Kubrick and like Spielberg were all like big fans of him and kind of brought him into, the industry and such.
Yeah.
So I think it's some of that too. But and his first like Elephant Man, like he had some more general.
Elephant Man is
like,
incredible.
So
like,
good.
I can't believe that's his second film. Like, oh my gosh.
It's insane. That's another one because like for a long time, I tend to love like the Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire, like Fire Walk with Me, like that tends to be my kind of preferred David Lynch zone. So I don't always revisit. I was telling you off mic before we started that like I'd rewatch The Straight Story and Elephant Man and stuff, and it's like yeah, I don't know. I think those almost get lost. Not lost. Obviously, Elephant Man was like a huge movie, but I don't know. It's like you almost don't associate those with him as much, and they're just like beautiful, beautiful stories of like humanity and empathy again.
Yeah. The fact that
Yeah,
his first 3 features were Eraserhead, The Elephant Man, and Dune.
yeah, it's so wild.
What?
I know.
And he was asked to direct Return of the Jedi, and he said no, but he
Yeah,
maybe would have directed Return of the Jedi. Like, that would have been just so strange.
I know. It's weird to think if his career would have followed the same trajectory, right? Like,
Yeah.
would that have failed and led him to
Yeah.
Blue Velvet the same way? Like, probably not.
Probably
but,
not.
like, would we be getting David Lynch Marvel movies if Return of the Jedi had worked out?
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have cast Kyle MacLachlan in anything. Like,
No.
you know, there's the sliding doors versions of all these things, but I do love the fact that he is so, like, his movies are weird, and yet they are kind of undeniable to the point where they are beloved by a lot of people. Like, and there are people like us who kind of bounce off of certain ones initially. Like my one, like after Lost Highway, which I now love, was, you know, Inland Empire is just really long. It's really experimental, and it's really like, it's, I won't say tough to watch, but it's like, it punishes you. It's a punishing watch.
Totally.
And that was one that I watched last year. You know, I got the Criterion. I love that most everything is on Criterion, which is great. But, and then just, you know, being like, all right, I'm going to watch this movie that I didn't like at first. And then being like, you know, it's still not my favorite, but I like it. I think it's really good. And I think, you know, there's so much good in it. And there were a lot of stuff that in it that I'm like, oh, this is you know, the narrative's actually fairly straightforward. I just didn't realize it at the time because everything else is so strange.
Right. Again, that was my first real proper David Lynch like movie watch, or at least one where I was like really aware of who he was and whatever, which is like, I would also recommend to people maybe start with Inland Empire, and if you can deal with that, like go for it with everything else. But actually probably not, because that would turn a lot of people off. But
I think so.
Yeah, it's a very I like loved it. Like, actually that was because I loved it. That was one of the weirdly, like, because I loved it on first watch, it made me very interested in him. But I don't think that that's the common reaction to that movie. I watched it in film school, like with a professor who was really enthusiastic about it, and I think that I like went in, he had told us stuff about it beforehand and kind of was adding context, so I think that probably helped too. But yeah,
when I did my rewatch last year, I watched a lot of the movies with my wife, who hadn't seen most of them.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't make her watch all of them, and Inland Empire was one I didn't. I wasn't even like, you know, you might like this one. I was like, there's no way you're gonna like this one. It's way too long, and it's oblique and strange. It looks weird.
It looks ugly. It's that part of it is actually the hardest part for me, is just the like physical look of it is rough. But
my wife likes Lost Highway the best. Like, without me prompting, I was just like, so what was the one? What one did you like the best? And she was like, I think I liked Lost Highway the best. And I was like, incredible.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's great. I do think like that one and like Mulholland Drive are such like twin movies in a way. They're basically the same story in certain ways, kind of his doppelganger type inverted nightmare thing. But and
I forget if I said this in the podcast with Maggie last year, but like one of them is a dream that then becomes reality, and the other one is a reality that then becomes dream. In a strange way.
Yeah. That's kind of mirrored. And it also, like, those lead right into The Return too, because the whole concept of like doppelgangers and tulpas or whatever, like that's a big thing throughout The Return. So again, it's like almost a lot of his work was leading up to him just like exploding all this ideas into his magnum opus, if you will.
And that's why it's so interesting to, you know, he was an interesting guy. He was a man of many facets, but just the dichotomy of some of the like dark art of, you know, some like the first episode of The Return, episode 8, definitely the last episode, which maybe second to Firewalk with Me is the most disturbed I've ever been watching anything.
I feel like you and I talked a lot about that last episode.
We sure did. Because I was like obsessed with it. I was just like, what is this other realm? And like,
I know.
who are these people? Like, just all this stuff. And
Yeah.
um, I know people have theories and stuff, and at this point it's moot because,
Yeah.
also around the time that I watched this and after when we were talking about it, there was all these rumors that maybe there was going to be another Twin Peaks or a spinoff or something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously they never came to anything.
Wisteria. I wrote something with
Wisteria,
Nerdist,
right?
and I remember you and I were it was almost like I wrote it, but I think it was almost like a collab. We were sending each other like stuff that we saw about it. But that was like I really fell down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because remember, like the Twin Peaks cast was like sharing pictures of like a wisteria tree, and it was like it just felt like that was something coming, and it does seem like it was. I don't know if it was Twin Peaks, but he was working on a Netflix show that got canned. So which like I really hope all the people that prevented his stuff from coming to light towards the end of his life feel really bad now. Like feel guilty about not giving us those things, because what the hell. But
and I think it was like a year or so ago, because he stopped doing the weather report. That was something that, not exactly when, but a couple, like not long after Angelo Badalamenti died. He took a break, he came back for a little bit, and then he was basically done doing that.
Yeah.
And his own health was obviously taking a downturn. There was at one point he put out a video that was like, watch this space, there's an announcement coming. And then we were all like, oh my God, here it comes. And then it was just a music video he made.
Yeah, I know. Whenever artists do that now, I'm so suspicious. Like people do that a lot, and then it ends up being like a charity thing or something, which like, good, but like it gets people like us who have to cover that stuff a little too hyped for kind of a letdown.
I was so stoked, and then
the other thing with the Wisteria, I remember like it specifically, there were things that seemed like it was tying it to that last episode of The Return, which I think is why we talked about it a lot. It was like, I can't even remember exactly what, but there was like a clue where like there was some address that like was the same address as like the diner in the Return. Like there was a lot of stuff that I don't think was coincidental, even if it was just him. Like maybe he was going to do a short or something, who knows? But like it felt like a lot of clues for something.
Well, I think in retrospect, that last episode works as a culmination to everything, where it's literally the lights in front of the Palmer house turn off, like it's all it's done basically, and then you just have what more is there than Dale Cooper looking confused and Laura Palmer screaming. Like that's basically what the show is. But
speaking of that, this is a quick aside. I promise it's funny and you'll get a kick out of it. I was like on a dating app. This was a while ago, but I was like talking to some guy. And actually no, it was like around when David Lynch died, and he was like telling me something.
Oh, so this was such a long time ago.
Listen, January has been 16 years,
absolutely,
so
100% true.
It felt like a long time ago, but it was actually like a few weeks ago. But and it was just some guy I didn't end up doing anything with, but he was like talking to me about David Lynch, and he was like, yeah, he was going to work on this show for like Netflix, and it was like people thought it was like tied to whatever, and I was like, yeah, I know, and I sent him a list to the article I just referenced, and I was like, I wrote about it because I don't like when men try to mansplain things to me that I already know.
Oh, you don't? So, oh, wow, that's weird.
No, and I really. That's a whole separate tangent. If you're a film writer on the dating apps, men really love to act like they know more than you, and it becomes a competition. But I always win, so yeah.
Well, yeah, you've got the cred to back it up.
I know.
And 700 articles on Nerdist alone just about Twin Peaks.
I know. It was kind of a dick move for me, but it felt good. So,
what are you gonna do? You're not gonna talk to that guy again.
No.
That was the thing about doing, because I met my wife on a dating app, so I have nothing against dating apps. But one of the first dates I went on was very bad, and I felt gross afterwards. I was, it was sort of like, well, bye. I don't, and then like I drove, a block away, and then I went, oh, I never have to see or talk to this person ever again. What a great day! Like it's not like you met someone at work or even like in your daily life.
Right, you can just kind of be like, okay, move along.
Our whole meeting was contrived, so why would I sweat having to? It's like delete from my phone. Goodbye.
Related to that, this is also related to Nerdist. I went on a date with somebody in Austin that I met on a dating app, and we had talked like in the, I think it was on Tinder or whatever. Like we had talked in the messaging about how, we're just like explaining what our jobs were or whatever. And I told him I like write about pop culture, and we went on our date, and halfway through the date, he started asking me for like editor contacts. It became clear that he didn't actually want to date me. He just wanted to use me to break into that line of work too. So yeah.
The worst. The absolute worst.
I know, it was real bad.
Oh, I thought we were going to have a human connection, but you just wanted my emails.
Yeah, it was real bad. But that was one of those cases where I was on the date, so I couldn't just get out, just like run away. So, and he was my ride, so I had to endure the rest of it. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
The perils of navigating all that stuff.
Which is very like Twin Peaks. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
the perils of life.
Yeah, of being imposed upon.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could probably talk for a million more years, but I feel like that's a decent place to wrap up. Lindsey, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And it was a great conversation. We'll have to have you back on.
I would love to come back on.
Talk about anything you want.
Go deep on a lot of stuff. As we described, we both are completionists and stuff,
we
and
sure
think
are.
a lot about our things. So I will have much to talk about.
How can people find you, your work, or anything you want to plug on the internet, should they choose to do so?
Yeah, well, I still write for Nerdist sometimes, so I have something coming up on there soon. I also I'm on Blue Sky. That's really the only social media like public facing one I have anymore. So it's just my name, Lindsey Romain, on Blue Sky. And I'll post any work on there. I have a Substack that I link to there too, where I'll write pop culture stuff occasionally. So kind of, not one solid space anymore, but I'm still writing and I'm still out there.
Yeah. It's a strange time for trying to be self-promotional, because it's like, where do people go now?
I know. I have been off Twitter, X, whatever.
Yeah.
The artist formerly known as Twitter for before it was even cool, before Musk even bought it. So,
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Before changed names, so I was like, I'm off.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye. So I can confidently say I've never been on X.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Look at us.
I also am on Blue Sky. I haven't really checked in that much recently, but Kyle D. Anderson, I believe, on that. You can also follow me on Letterboxd if you choose to do so.
I was just about to say that. I'm also on Letterboxd, just my name, Lindsey Romain. Follow me and look at all the weird stuff that I watch.
Most recently, you watched Claire's Knee, and
yes, the Romer film.
Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, which is one of my favorite movies ever.
I saw it on a big screen at the Music Box here.
Awesome.
They've been doing a Giallo.
Of course.
Like themed month. So I've seen a couple of stuff there. Yeah.
January Giallo, they do that here as well.
Yeah.
You can follow me on Letterboxd as well, Kyle_Anderson. Okay. Lindsey, thank you again.
Thank you.
I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit Nerdist.com.